So while I was at school doing my A-levels, peak oil became something I was incredibly well versed in. In fact, it's something I was pretty much obsessed with while I was doing my A-levels. And I used to go around very much with this notion that the world is going to go to hell in a handbasket due to resource security issues and so on and so forth. And that by the time I'm an adult, there'll be major disruptions to global supply chains and major economic problems as a result of that. And I've just been reading on the Financial Times' website this article about the supply chain issues now in China also, and how there's things like power shortages to certain Chinese towns now, and factories running at half capacity due to a need to save on power and electricity, and ultimately coal, natural resources, things like this. And this is causing knock-on supply chain issues here in the West. And then I'm looking also at the fuel shortage here in the UK, and I just get the sneaking suspicion now that this isn't the sort of thing that's not really going to go away. And we're going to have to face up to the fact that we have been using far, far too much oil, coal and gas, and we need to majorly rethink the structure of our economies when it comes to these things. Otherwise we could be in for like a real nightmare. And I just see like every idiot who lives in a town going around in a gas guzzling Range Rover or something, and I'm thinking it is your fucking fault that this shit has happened. And I don't know why I lost my obsession with peak oil quite so much over the years. I think it may have been to do with thinking things like maybe it'll be alright, maybe it'll never really happen. But now I think it is happening. And I've just looked at this sort of graph of oil production by regions of the world, and there's been a drop off since COVID, of course, in oil production, and that may be part of the problem here, but still, I think the data is pretty clear, or not clear as such, but I think there's a good case to be made that we may have hit peak oil back in the 2010s or so, judging by these graphs. I think Saudi Arabia is more or less there at peak oil. The United States' oil production apparently has surged since 2010 or so, I think, judging by this graph. But that's all from Canadian tar sands, which are themselves a finite resource. And Canadian and Venezuelan tar sands, I should say. And yeah, it's gonna happen at some point. If it's not happening already, and we're not already seeing palpable signs that it's happening, it's very, very scary shit. I might get well back into peak oil again and start vlogging about this. So yeah, I mean, the thing is, the amount of oil we were consuming in 1979, which was when there was another oil shortage, 62 million barrels per day in production, and now 2012, 73 million barrels per day. Productions per day, but that graph doesn't go to 2020. Yeah. And yes, obviously there's issues like Brexit involved in this. That's a big issue as well. Obviously there's issues like COVID involved in it as well. And the sort of conspiratorial side of my thinking does sort of lean towards suggesting maybe COVID and this whole Great Reset plan, if it was a plandemic, you know what I mean? If this really was a planned thing, was a way to get us to quickly stop using as much coal, oil and natural gas to avoid the worst of the energy crisis. And it was a global thing because it's a global crisis. And yeah, it's very, very worrying, obviously. I don't know the extent to which I believe that sort of thing. But It's a tempting thing to think, I have to say. A lot of people do think like that as well. And I don't think it's unreasonable of them to think like that necessarily. But yeah, incredibly worrying. And you think, oh, we've got a global pandemic on the one hand now, what's going to be the next thing? Oh, fuel shortages are the next thing. So, why the pandemic was on foresaw the fuel shortages, is that it? And trying to hold off the fuel shortages for as long as humanly possible, and try and maybe make some money in the interim with pharmaceuticals and so on. I don't know. It all reeks to me anyway. It reeks to me of corruption and bullshit. Yeah, the peak oil graph is always very worrying. I mean, there's some graphs going on to sort of suggest that we could continue increasing. Oh no, it doesn't. World peak August 2015, 96.9 million barrels per day globally. And that's unconventional oil included. So yeah, they'd have calculated this back in 2015 or earlier, that this was going to happen. But that's from the Post-Carbon Institute, and I'm not so certain how much I trust that figure. Yeah. And then you get other people who sort of, I've met from conspiracy circles actually, stating, oh, oil's abiotic, it'll never run out. It's like, first of all, if it's abiotic, I don't think that means it's a finite, an infinite resource. It would only never run out if it were infinite. If it's a finite resource, it will run out eventually. If we can consume it faster than it regenerates or whatever. Like, what does abiotic mean again? Without biological agents involved in it? Abiotic definition. Physical rather than biological, not derived from living organisms. We know that's not true. We know that's not true about oil. It is derived from living organisms. Like coal. Coal is the leftover of primeval forests. And oil is... The oil fields were formed after asteroid impacts. It was like my science knowledge, like not on point. It was everything I learned at school bollocks, including peak oil. And they mentioned that in A-level geography as well. They mentioned peak oil, and I was like, yeah, I know that's a huge issue, and that's going to really fuck us up. But what gets the most press in geography is obviously global warming, and it's like, global warming, that may be centuries away from really kicking in. The resource issue, that's definitely going to happen. That's going to happen soon. I was someone who wanted to really change the world when I was at school, and change it for the better. But the way it's going, I don't know. I really don't. I don't see me being able to change anything at all, frankly. How would I do it? Crack fusion? I don't know. What will end up happening is we'll have to stop driving such big, ridiculous cars, ridicule and lambast anyone who does, and have a massive sort of social change in how we deal with this sort of thing. And if you need a car at all, just drive a little sort of mini car, you know, that doesn't consume that much fuel, or maybe a Prius or something, or a Tesla. But even those consume loads of electricity. I don't know how environmentally friendly they actually are, or how resource friendly they actually are, let's say. Probably just like old, beaten up-ish cars, probably the better way to go. Particularly if you live in a fucking town. What's wrong with people? You got like a Range Rover on the driveway. It's like you're an idiot for owning that. That's what a Range Rover is for. Is for like genteel people in the countryside, or a farmer who's got a bit too much spare cash lying around. It's not for city people. It's not for you. Don't have it. No 4x4 is. You only need it if you need to pull a trailer or something. Jesus Christ. Grinds my gears. Makes my blood ache. It makes it ache. But yeah, no, oil is not abiotic. And crude oil certainly is not abiotic, it's biotic. But, yeah, I digress. I think we're in for major social upheaval, though I think it's going to be pretty gradual. And I think it's going to be, from here on out at least, and in Britain particularly, it's going to be very much like this from now on and less like that, if you see what I mean. It's going to be a trend of things reducing and us gradually going back to a more primitive way of living. That's what I think is probably going to happen here. And if you want sort of, this like wonderful, privileged, spacefaring future or whatever, I think it's probably not going to happen. I think the best thing you could hope for is to sort of limit the worst of it and try and do good things with your life in spite of, the bad things that may well happen as a result of all this, and try and help other people maybe, I don't know, and think less about yourself and accumulating stupid shit like Range Rovers. Or you know what I saw the other day on campus? I saw a student with one of those new BMW sports cars. And I was like, whoa, how do you afford one of those? It's either drug dealing or parents' money. That's the only two ways it could have been. But, or a little bit of both. I was like, why the fuck are you driving that stupid piece of shit? I mean, think about how a young guy particularly looks in a car like that. Unbelievable. Like, you look such a fucking tool, you don't even know it. It's horrible to see. But, that's a midlife crisis car. That's someone for, that's like for a 40-year-old man who's got a bit more money than sense, and I don't think that this society that's addicted to growth can continue being addicted to growth. I think we're going to have to become more attuned to the realities in the future of shrinkage of the economy and of using less in general. Less power, fewer car rides here, there and everywhere, less commuting, less work, or less non-essential work. And maybe it could be a good life for that reason also. Maybe it could be like quite nice and people could come together as a result of things like this. And it could be a bit more back to the landish. Who knows? I don't, frankly. But it's going to be different. I think it's going to be very, very different in the future, because we will run out of oil and coal and natural gas, and those things will happen. And don't believe anyone who tells you any different, because they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, honestly. So thank you everyone for watching. Bye bye, and I love you lots.